with chapter 4 because I felt like chapter 4, I felt like I needed give it a little bit of an oomph. And there's a lot that I have to say about this. Actually, this week I felt like God was really teaching me a lot about what it means to take up your cross. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But I want to begin with this idea that all of us at this particular moment may feel overwhelmed, may feel stretched thin, and kind of feel like you're unsure how to keep going, right? I see some nods, right? And many of us find our jobs exhausting, family life strains. Many are carrying guilt, fear, pressure. And we all come to church and we say to the Lord, Lord, I can't carry this anymore. I can't carry it. I'm overwhelmed, I'm burdened, there's so much happening. And in the words of our hearts, when we come and we say all these things to him, he speaks to us and he invites us to rest. And he promises us in Matthew 11:28, he says, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and lowly heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. See, Jesus enters into our struggles. He enters into our struggles. He acknowledges the weight that all of us carry, the weariness that settles deep within us. And he offers us rest, but this rest comes with a condition. What's the condition? Take my yoke upon you. Take my yoke upon you. So what I want to do is I want to kind of dig a little bit deep into what it means to actually carry the cross. And I want to invite you to read this quote with me because I think this quote is really powerful, and I think it has a lot that will kind of speak to all of our souls this morning. It says, all that are in anxiety, in sorrows, in sins, come, not that I may call you to account. So the speaker here is Christ, written on the lips of St. John Chrysostom. Not that I may call you to account, but that I may do away with your sins. Come not that I want your honor, but that I want your salvation. For I, says he, will give you rest. He said, not I will save you only, but what is much more, I will place you in, altogether, I will place you in all security. Is there anyone anxious right now? Anyone burdened now? Anyone worried now? Anyone freaking out about certain situations that are going on in your life? What does he say? I place you in all security. See, carrying life's burdens alone will crush you. I don't know how people that don't know Jesus do it. I don't understand it. It'll crush you. When you feel like there's no hope, when you feel like there's nothing to look forward to. Carrying life's burdens will crush you. Carrying them with Christ will ease you. What do I mean by ease you? Does it mean that my circumstances will change? Does it mean that I won't be burdened? Does it mean that I won't be anxious anymore? No, those things may happen, but I know that there's somebody with me. You know, there's that great old story that some of the old timers may know, but some of the young ones, I'm amazed at how this story has kind of gotten lost. Y'all know about the story, the footprints in the sand. Anyone who's here that's from the generation, my generation, will be nodding their heads. Anyone who's younger, look, they're all like, what's footprints in the sand? I know. Yeah, we still have it framed. There was this famous story that years ago went viral. It was a story about this person who had this vision of walking on the sand. And on the sand, he's walking with Jesus. And the Lord kind of reveals to him all of the moments of his life. And in all the moments of his life, he sees, in the moments that things are going great, he sees two sets of footsteps. And he's like, oh, wow, Lord, sometimes I noticed you, sometimes I didn't notice you. Sometimes I was aware of your presence, and sometimes I wasn't. But I see these two sets of footprints. And then he gets to these really difficult moments in his life. And then all of a sudden, he starts to see one set of footprints. And he's like, Lord, what's your deal? Why were you just with me in the good times? Why did you leave me hanging in the times where it was most difficult? And he says, my son, in those moments where things were really, really heavy, when you felt burdened, when you felt overwhelmed, I wasn't walking beside you. I was carrying you. And that's why you only see one set of footprints. And that story, all of us, many have it framed in their houses, like Jumana just said. Many of us have it framed in our houses, but it really speaks to the fact that in the moments that all of us have been overwhelmed and burdened with circumstances, and you felt like, I can't get through this. There's no way that I'm going to get past this circumstance. This will be the end of me. Somehow, you got through it. And those who have Christ with them know that he's the one who carried you in those moments. And knowing that God is with us is one of the most beautiful things. That's why he calls himself Emmanuel, God with us. Not God above us, not God beside us, God with us. God with us. See, life is heavy. Responsibilities pile up. Stress builds. The weight of expectations, personal failures can feel unbearable. But the cross reminds us that we are never to carry our burdens alone. Let me dig a little bit deeper in that. We know that St. Paul in Philippians chapter 2, this is one of the best or most beautiful passages where St. Paul speaks about Christ, and he leaves us with this beautiful passage where he says, who being in the form of God, he's speaking about Christ, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation. Christ, it wasn't a robbery for him to say that he was God. He came when he took flesh. He made himself of no reputation and became a bondservant. The actual word here, bondservant, is a slave, doulos, slave, abd in Arabic. And coming in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. See, God never left us alone. You understand, like this, the story of the incarnation, like a high school kid the other day on one of the retreats, he pulled me aside, he's like, Abouna, why is God so dramatic? Like, why is all this theatrical stuff? Like, why does he have to, like, create us, then, like, send prophets, then make the commandments, then split seas, then do all this stuff, and then come down and, like, I'm like, see, you're a high school kid, you don't know what it's like to be a parent yet. When you have a kid, and that kid asks you for anything, you'll go to the furthest extreme possible for that kid. You will give your heart if you need to. You'll give your leg if you need to. You will go to the furthest extent possible for your children. We sometimes think God is dramatic. Like, oh, why all this stuff? But the only way that love can actually be true and be real is when love goes the distance. When love is willing to go to the furthest extent possible for her beloved. See, God didn't want to just be the God who is distant. God didn't want to just be the God who knows us from afar, who sends us letters. He's the God who wanted to be with us. And he came and he humbled himself. He steps into our suffering. Imagine the God of the universe stepping into the limitations of human life. The one who forms the stars now lays in a manger and looks up at the stars. The one who commands the angels now washes the feet of fishermen. The one who holds all things together now hangs on a cross. The creator of the universe didn't cling to divine privileges. He came and entered into our condition, into our suffering, into our brokenness. And this is why they call it the paradox of the incarnation, the scandal of the incarnation. Many non-Christians can say, how can God, the Almighty, become man? Well, if God, the Almighty, loves man so much, he's willing to go to the furthest extent possible for his creation. See, this is the mystery of the cross, ladies and gentlemen. The mystery of the cross is that Christ didn't suffer so that we wouldn't suffer. He suffered so that when we do it, we never have to do it alone. He didn't suffer so that you and I wouldn't have to ever go through the things that are the byproduct of the fall, the byproduct of our human condition. He suffered so that we could know that there is a God who feels what we feel, who understands what we go through, who comforts us, who knows if you were to go to God one day and stand before him and say, Lord, do you know what it was like to be betrayed by your best friend? It's like, actually, I do know a little bit about that. Do you know what it's like to love somebody so much and like do everything for your children or your spouse and they do nothing back for you? He's like, yeah, actually, I know a little bit about that. Like, I know that I died for the church and the church sometimes rejects me. I know what it's like to have people that you come to heal and they call you Beelzebub and demon-possessed and they say all these bad things about you. And this is the mystery of this passage. He says, when I am lifted up, I will draw all men onto me. I'll draw all people onto myself. Jesus is saying that his death on the cross becomes the center of human experience. No longer does pain isolate us. When Christ is lifted up, he becomes the meeting point of human sorrow and divine healing. He becomes the center point of human sorrow and divine healing. So Jesus has walked in every form of suffering. Loss, he lost Lazarus. He lost many other friends. It wasn't like he stopped, the plague of death upon his friends. He stopped the plague of death for all of us when he conquered death by his death and gave us the hope of eternal life. But he suffered loss. I'm sure he watched his father, St. Joseph, pass. We don't think about that, right? He was betrayed, physical pain, loneliness. No experience of yours is foreign to him. This means that your wounds are not wasted. Every single thing that all of us are going through, it's not wasted. It's absorbed by him and can be used for a beautiful purpose. See, he doesn't observe us. I want to just break down this passage for a few moments. In Luke chapter 7, 11 to 17, it says, "Now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and a large crowd. And when he came near to the city, to the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow." Context is always important in Scripture. So this woman, widow, only son, like Luke he's a physician, he gives very specific details. And she was a widow, and a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, "Do not weep." Then he came and touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still, and he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." So he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. Then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. Do you guys know, like, what it was like to be a widow in that time period? Like, to be a widow is like one thing, but then to be a widow and then lose your only son, you basically have become like the poorest of the poor. Like, because if you have a child, your child will provide for you. But now, you're a widow, you've lost your child, you've lost your means of sustenance. Now you have to basically become a beggar. People have to give you in their pity towards you. So Christ sees this woman in her pain, in her sorrow, in her struggle. Not only is she a widow, but then she loses her son. And the word compassion here, he had compassion. It comes from a Greek word called splagnizomai. Try to say that 3 times. Splagnizomai. No, just kidding. What does that word mean? That word means that your bowels are like hurting. Like when Christ sees this, like, you know, when you translate Greek or Hebrew into English, it's not enough. It kind of has this like superficiality, but when you go back to the original words, splagnizomai means that Jesus saw this woman, and his stomach turned within him. He felt a deep pain within his bowels towards the circumstance that this woman was going through. See, many of us think that God is not compassionate. Many of us think that Christ isn't moved. But you see this over and over and over again in this word, splagnizomai. He was moved with compassion everywhere throughout the Scripture, because he burns with pain in his bowels. His stomach, like in Arabic, like batnu kan ta'bana, like it was like his bowels were turning. Any of you have ever had like a moment where you're in a very, very stressful situation, or you're really burdened about something, you just feel sick to your stomach? You know the expression? Feel sick to your stomach? He's sick to his stomach about the circumstances that are going on within us. He burns with pain. See, to say you care and to not act means that you don't care at all. See, Christ doesn't see us and just like, "Oh, sorry, you're on your own, buddy, been a mac." No, he enters into our human condition to heal us. He sees this widow at Nain, and he raises her son. He sees you today. He sees you. You think that God doesn't care. Oftentimes we think that he is just absent in our circumstances, but he's very present. And he very much wants to enter into the circumstances that are going on within you today. You see the story of the Samaritan woman today. The sermon I gave today was all about Christ entering into our mess. He enters into our mess. He doesn't leave us. He doesn't forsake us. See, this is why, for all of us, if we are to take the pain and the sufferings that we have, and we were to utilize it as a catalyst to move us, it could become a real major source of not healing only for us, but of many others. Many of us, when we go through hard times, what we think is the cross that we carry is just, it was just God to try to grow me. It was just God to try to teach me a lesson. But maybe the cross that you're carrying today is meant to be something to motivate you to go use it to help somebody else. Maybe the person who is going through a sickness today, you're uniquely qualified to comfort somebody who's going through a sickness as well. Why? Because you know what they're going through. Maybe a person who has lost a loved one, you feel uniquely qualified to comfort someone who also has lost a loved one. Maybe a person who's went through a heartbreak or a real devastating situation. Your circumstances, the cross that you have carried, now can be used as a Band-Aid for somebody else. But oftentimes the cross that we carry, we kick and we scream and we're upset about it because we can't see the purpose of what the cross that we're carrying is for. See, we need to follow Christ out of love. And the cross that he gives us is a loving medium for him to unite himself to us and for us to be united with him. I'll make that clear for you in a second. But I think if we run away from the cross, if we run away from the circumstances that he bestows upon us, if we kick and we scream and we don't join our circumstances to his circumstances, then we'll miss out on the real beauty. I want to just share a passage from St. Paul that I love very deeply because I think it really speaks to the heart of St. Paul. What made St. Paul be shipwrecked, beaten, dragged down the streets, like go to the furthest extent possible, is he understood how much Christ did for him. And what Christ did for him motivated him to go to the furthest extent possible to tell every single creature about him. If St. Paul could preach to the cats, he would preach to the cats. Like when you see this man is like how motivated he is. He says, "For the love of Christ compels us, because we judge this, that if one died for all, then all died. And he who died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and rose again." The cross that you carry, the circumstances that you're burdened with, is not just for you. You can join your circumstances to him. And he did all of these things for us so that we could no longer live for ourselves. I'm going to give a real living example of this in a second. You all know Father Bishoy Kamel. His feast day was Friday. And we didn't get to really speak about Abouna Bishoy Kamel because I love him very, very much. He's my guy, right? He's my guy. I have to speak about him, and I felt that we didn't have an opportunity to really go in. So I want to just share with you the motivation for Abouna Bishoy Kamel. The motivation for Abouna Bishoy Kamel is the cross. Abouna Bishoy Kamel had this icon on the left of this picture, the picture of St. Mary Magdalene, sitting at the feet of the cross. He put this picture above his bed. And every day, he would sit before this picture, and this would be the fuel and the motivation for Abouna Bishoy Kamel. He understood how much Christ did for him on the cross. And he would say, "Oh, that I could be like St. Mary Magdalene in this picture. I could sit at the feet of the cross, and the cross would be the motivation and the movement that led me to be Christ to every single person that I encounter." Now, Abouna Bishoy didn't believe that he was, but we know that in his life, he became, they call him the living gospel or the open gospel. That's the other words that they use for him. A Coptic iconographer recently drew this picture of Abouna Bishoy Kamel as St. Mary Magdalene. And in the picture here, I love it so, so much because the blood of Christ is what was the fire that moved Abouna Bishoy Kamel to do all the things that he did. In fact, when he was sick on his deathbed in cancer, he asked Tasoni Angel to bring that picture to him. And in his subconscious, he said, "Tasoni Angel, you should get one for yourself." Like he just wanted everybody to see this image of St. Mary Magdalene sitting at the feet. Why are you, Christ, wounded? Why are you suffering? So that your suffering could be for the life of the world. Right? We call him, like we say, the life-giving sufferings of Christ. Whenever we suffer, the suffering that we endure can be a means of life for those around us. Christ suffered for our sake to give us the fuel. When you see Abouna Bishoy Kamel, the fire that's coming out of his back, that the man was on fire. And I'm just going to give you a few anecdotes in his life that show us about the principles of what it means to carry the cross. See, he lived out this verse. He says, "Let us run with endurance the race that was set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." Christ ran with endurance to the cross. He didn't run away from the cross. He didn't complain about the cross. He ran with the cross because he knew who was on the other side of the cross, you and I. He knew the salvation of the world was on the other side of the suffering that he was going to do for our sake. See, there is a redemptive value of suffering. But rejoice to the extent that you will partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you also may be glad with exceeding joy. See, pain is real. Every single one of us have pain. But suffering is optional. Let me explain what that means. Many of us have pain, but to suffer is optional. You can have pain. Is there one person in this room? Viktor Frankl, in the book Man's Search for Meaning, one of the greatest books of all time. Everybody has to read this book. He writes in this book that pain is like gas in a room. It gets disseminated to all different people. Every single person in this room has had pain in one shape, way, or form. But how do you respond to that pain? What do you do when you're in pain? Do you kick? Do you scream? Do you let everybody know how much pain you're going through? Or do you embrace that pain as the catalyst and the motivation for you to understand, first off, what that pain can be used for, and then second off, for it to be a motivation for you to be able to comfort those who also are in pain. See, pain is real, but suffering is optional. If you bear the cross joyfully, it will bear you. I'm going to share a few stories. Abouna Tedros writes this beautiful story, and he says, I do not exaggerate on saying that Father Bishoy, in health and sickness, and even in his death, witnessed to Jesus Christ. His departure impressed many people to enjoy the life of repentance in a week's time of joining the heavenly hosts. For example, in 1 week of his suffering, one of the youth told me, Father Bishoy was tired of me, and I always let him down because of my sin. However, on Thursday, March 22nd, when I entered into the church and stood before the corpse, I felt to please his heart, so I offered a true repentance that I still experience powerfully. What changed this young man's life? The suffering of Abouna Bishoy and the love that Abouna Bishoy carried. Like the way that he endured his last few days, the way that he responded to his pain was not to suffer. He did it joyfully. Now, many of us will say, Abouna, you're asking way too much of us. Like, let me kick, let me scream, let me complain. Okay, have your moment. Have your moment, kick, scream. We all struggle. But then, at a certain point, you have to transform that suffering into something, or that pain into something that can be used. And Abouna Bishoy lived that out. I could tell you story after story after story about this man. And in fact, yesterday I was sitting and reading a little bit about him. There was a great story of this young deacon who had come to church, and he gets into the church, and he starts insulting Abouna Bishoy, just flipping out, just reaming him. And Abouna Bishoy didn't even hear it. So one of the deacons grabs the guy, hey, Ebni, he grabs the guy from the neck and pulls him aside. He's like, get out of here. What are you doing insulting Abouna? And then the deacon, after the guy leaves, he goes to Abouna Bishoy. He says, Abouna, did you know this guy was insulting you? He says, take me to him. So Abouna Bishoy goes to the guy, and what does he do? He falls down and kisses the guy's feet. What the? Like, he gets down and he literally kisses the feet of the guy, and the guy's ashamed and mortified that the priest, and he gets down and he prostrates. Look at the way that this man carried himself, because he knew, if somebody insults me, if somebody persecutes me, if somebody, you all know the Farageya story, where he's walking down the street and one day one guy spits at him, and then he comes home, and then he tells Tasoni in jail, there's like a loogie on my shirt, can you wash it? And Tasoni in jail says, who is these guys who are insulting you? He's like, you dummy. Tasoni, you dummy. Blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely before my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. Why am I telling you all these stories about Abouna Bishoy? Because I have a confession to make. I was sitting in my office with somebody this week, and she was complaining to me about a hardship in her life. And I was like, it was a circumstance that had kept coming over and over and over again, and both of us were dealing with this circumstance. And I got really upset, I'll be honest with you. I was like, I'm tired of the same narrative over and over and over again, like enough, like I'm washing my hands of this situation. I was really frustrated. And then I looked over, I have this icon of Abouna Bishoy. I looked over, and it was literally as though Abouna Bishoy like whispered in my ear. He's like, oh, you want to just love when it's convenient for you. Oh, you want to just go to the extent of what you think is necessary to serve others. And I felt like the Spirit of God rebuked me in that moment, telling me, love goes the distance. I was willing to go to the cross for you, and you're not willing to endure some foolishness in your community. You're just going to wash your hand the moments it gets inconvenient. And I think for many of us, in the suffering that we're going through, or in the pain that we're going through, we really struggle with being able to have patience with other people. We really struggle with being able to endure the circumstances that are going on in other people's lives. But I think those who sit at the feet of this cross right here, and those who understand the extent of what Christ did for us, will be willing to carry the cross and the burdens of those around us. We'll carry our own cross joyfully, and then we'll also be able to carry the burdens that are on those around us. Look what he says. They are your children, Lord. Some are good, others are evil. Others are wasting themselves. They all have one thing in common. They are your children. I am the servant of your children. I have no right to insult or despise any of them. If I do, I would be insulting you or despising you. I only can serve them, love them, and assure them of your promise that you love them and carried all of their sins. See, one time, Sonia in jail was buying bread from a young boy. And this boy would come deliver the bread to Sonia in jail, and then he brought one of his friends with him, who was a young Muslim boy. And he told Sonia in jail that he had no shoes. And Sonia in jail, turned the little boy away, and she told him and his friend, she said, here's the money for the bread, and tell the guy to go to his mosque and get shoes from there. I'm painting Sonia in jail, she was an angel, but this is just one of her bad stories. All of us have our weaknesses. So when she went home, or when Abouna Bishoy came home, she retold the story to him, and he became upset with her. He said, is this what Christ taught us? Is this what Christ taught us? This afternoon, go buy shoes for that child. So, although he was known for his firmness and his courageous stand, he was filled with the commandment of love, to go the distance for people, even those who insult you and persecute you, even those who ridicule you. See, the cross is not an invitation to, like a tattoo on your wrist. It's not an invitation to a necklace on your neck. It's not an invitation to oh, I love you, Jesus, for when it's convenient. It's an invitation to go the distance for those around us. It's an invitation, like John was speaking about last year, to not put people in a certain box and only love them when it's convenient for us. See, what I want to encourage you is do this. I want to give you guys, there's just, again, a ton of stories I could speak about, but I'm not going to keep going about him because I want to bring it back to our struggles. I want you all to name your cross today. Whatever cross you're carrying, whether it be a stressor at work, whether it be a sick loved one, whether it be a child that you have that's burdening you, whatever cross you're carrying, what are you struggling with right now? Be specific. Is it fear? Is it a strained relationship? Is it temptation? I want you today to take whatever that cross is, and I want you to bring it before God. Can you give me, that's step one. Can you give me that promise? Okay. Now, I want you to find someone that you can share that struggle with. Whether it be a spiritual father, whether it be a good friend, whether it be a mentor, someone that you can share that burden with. We're not meant to carry our burdens alone. But I think the struggle for many of us is we kind of keep things in and we hold things in our hearts and then we explode. Find somebody that you can just be like, hey, I'm really struggling with this circumstance. Can you pray with me? And don't go to complain, go to pray. Don't go and say, let me fatfat back. I love the word Arabic, fatfat. It's a great word. It's a great word. There's no better word than fatfat. So good. So good. I learned that from Uncle Amin. It's a great, it's a great word. It's a great word. Don't just go to fatfat. You can for a little bit, but go with the intention of, I want to pray. Can you help me, encourage me, and point me to Christ being with me? Let your suffering soften your heart, not harden it. Use it as a way to grow in compassion for those who are hurting. If you're suffering today, right now, in something, use it as a catalyst. Use it as a catalyst to comfort those around you. Maybe somebody in this room, another confession. You know me, I like to confess publicly. It's good for me. I used to be very critical of clergy. I'll be honest. Not Abouna Paul ever. I love Abouna Paul. But I used to be critical of clergy. I was like, they don't care about people. And always. And I grew up in a church in which my priests, they were amazing. I only understood the burden that clergy carry when I became a priest. And I now want to go kiss the feet of every single priest that ever served me, and I feel ashamed of myself for all the struggles or all the criticisms that I gave. See, why am I sharing this with you? Is I feel like sometimes for us, like our suffering makes us hardened and makes us try to point the blame at people and makes us try to like disrespect people. And we want to just always find the reason for why the circumstances are going on around us. And nobody's to blame. Nobody doesn't care. There's no human in this world that doesn't care about you. But all of us are human. All of us have limitations. So when we go to someone and when we do offer the burden or ask them to share the burden with us, they may not be in a place, by the way, that they're able to share that burden with you. So you have to like see where the person is at. But have compassion for those around you who may be going through something. Like, we go through stuff too. We go through stuff too, right, Abouna? Like, we go through stuff too. So if we are falling short, have compassion on us. Say a prayer for us. Say, Abouna, like, I hope the Lord gives you some grace. I hope the Lord gives you some grace. I'm praying for you. But I think for many of us, it's like, oh, Abouna, you didn't ask about me. I had somebody the other day rebuke me. It's really painful. I'm sorry. We're all sorry. We want to. But all of us need to have compassion towards all of us, towards one another, that I want you to be the medium to help me, but only Christ can be the medium to help you. We're here to take your hands and to do what? To pass you off to Christ. That's our job. Our job as priests is to take your hand and to do this. Here. Like, that's our job. And the job of all of us towards each other is to do what? To take each other's hands and to say, here, let me connect you to Christ. But if I don't have the faculties or the compassion or the ability to do so, my heart will get hard. My heart will get hard. And we don't want to be a church that's hardened to the burdens of those around us. We don't want to be a church that is quick to point the finger at everybody else and not willing to comfort and to encourage those around us. Make the cross that you're carrying today a prayer. Truly. The cross that you're carrying today. Turn moments of frustration or pain into moments of connection with the Lord. Say, Lord, I can't carry this without you. I need you to carry it with me. I need you to support me. So, number one, write it down. Figure out what it is and bring Christ into it. Number two, find somebody that you can speak to about it, whether it be us as the clergy, whether it be a close friend, a confidant, whether it be take your circumstance and don't let it harden you. Take your circumstance and use it as a medium to support and to encourage others. Don't point the blame. Just find someone that can support you. Finally, turn your cross into a prayer. And maybe we can all say this prayer together. Lord, help us to see our burdens in light of your cross. Teach us to love, not out of fear, because you have first loved us. Give us the strength to carry our cross, not alone, but with you. I'm going to give you a question to reflect on this week. How can I unite my suffering to Christ's this week? Think about that. How can I unite my suffering or my struggle or my circumstance to Christ this week? See what that will do to you in terms of how it'll make you pray. You'll start to thank God for your suffering. You know, there's a great prayer by a famous Christian pastor named George Matheson. George Matheson was a blind preacher, and he was kind of struggling with his circumstances because it's like really difficult to be able to preach and to kind of like advance the gospel when you're blind. And he has this famous prayer called the prayer of the thorns. He says, "My God, I've never thanked you for my thorn. I've thanked you 1,000 times for my roses, but never once for my thorn. Teach me the glory of the cross that I bear. Teach me the value of my thorns. Show me that I've climbed to you by the path of pain. Show me that my tears have become my rainbow." Whatever all of you are going through today, how can you unite your suffering to Christ's? How can you thank God for the thorn? How can you thank God for the struggle? And I know it's difficult, but when Job said, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord," many of us, the Lord hasn't taken away, or many of us, our pain have been small things, and we've hardened our hearts, we've become bitter, we've blamed everyone, we've maybe riled up the troops against people. Really, the question for us to ask today is, Lord, how can I not turn into anyone but be like you through the pain that I'm going through? I just want to be like you. I want to be like this man, sitting at the feet of your cross, and the suffering that you share with me, or I share with you, is the fuel and the catalyst for me to go to the furthest extent possible for those who are in need or those who are suffering around me. May God give us the grace and the strength to not just be people who know a lot about Jesus, but people who know him and follow him and go to the furthest extent possible with him. We need that in this church. We need that in our families. We need that in our community. We need that in our workplaces. We need people that are icons of Christ to every single person that they encounter, because the world is truly in desperate need of those who are the cross bearers. They call Abouna Bishoy Kamel the cross bearer. He carried the cross, and it gave him joy, motivation, and endurance. So maybe there's somebody in this room who will be the next Abouna Bishoy. Maybe somebody in this room will be the next Aswad in jail. Maybe somebody in this room will be the next person who will endure pain and use it as a catalyst and a fuel to serve those around you. By the way, Abouna Bishoy Kamel had cancer for a very, very, very long period of time. It made him more motivated to serve. We have people in this community. There's one of the aunties that passed away a few years ago. She had basically spinal fractures all through her spine and would go and serve the sick and go and care for those, even though she was in intense pain. You ask any of the people that this woman served, what that did to them, it shook them to their core. Your pain can be utilized as a person's band-aids who's also suffering with you. May God give us that motivation, that encouragement this day and every day. Glory be to God for every man. Let's stand for a prayer.